You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Welcome to Volatility Views, the premier program for volatility traders. Each week, we'll take a deep dive into the world of volatility with in-depth analysis, trading activity reviews, strategy breakdowns, cutting-edge education, and much more. We'll also bring you exclusive conversations with the traders, researchers, and asset managers who are reshaping the volatility landscape. If it involves volatility, then you'll find it on Volatility Views. And now, it's time to take a deep dive into the world of volatility. It's time for Volatility Views.
All right, everybody. That music means it is Friday. It is noon Central. It is 1 p.m. Eastern. Do you know what's popping off in the volatility markets? Let's find out together, shall we? It is time once again for Volatility Views, the premier program for volatility traders. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as from the network upon which so many of you have been mainlining these days. Did you miss us last week? Obviously, we were off for the July 4th holiday last week. A well-earned, much-deserved respite here on the network. Went out to the Western studio, had a little bit of fun last week. So all sorts of fun. But you know what? We're back. We're raring to go here for a little bit of Vol Views. If you're raring to go, you want to go above and beyond, you want to come back after Vol Views is over for some extra goodness, maybe some shady activity going on out there today. Let's find out. That'll be on Options Oddities coming up in a little bit, right after this show, listeners. So stay tuned for that out there. Where can you find that? Get access to that, theoptionsinsider.com/pro, or for you cool kids /secret club. But don't tell the guy next to you. Don't let him hear that. Just for you listeners. They get you Options Oddities. They get you pro Q&As. That gets you early access to a lot of great content. That gets you giveaways and a whole bunch more. You can join us live to mock my co-hosts. All sorts of fun. Theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go as we go around the horn and see who's joining us on the program today. First, let's go out to the hurricane-adjacent southern volatility mecca known as Austin. I do believe they escaped the brunt of it, though, where we are joined once again by the greasiest of meatballs, Mr. Mark Sebastian from OptionPit.com. Mr. Meatball, glad you were outside of the path of the hurricane. And how was your 4th of July respite, sir? Did you have fun?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We were I went to Michigan and hung out with my family. 21 people in one house is a lot, especially when the youngest is just Valentino and everyone else is a teenager. But it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad to be back. The one thing I truly missed was my Volatility Views time.
I think we all missed that, sir. So joining us to help add a double dose of Vol Views, we can give you double the Vol fun to make up for last week, listeners. We are joined once again by the once, future, and present, now Dr. VSTOXX. That's right. He's not talking to us. He's crunching all sorts of VSTOXX numbers these days. Mr. Russell Rhoads, also moonlighting over there, corrupting young minds at the Kelley School of Business. Mr. Rhoads, welcome back to Vol Views, sir. How was your 4th of July holiday?
Went under the knife.
Oh.
And they fixed my retina and fixed my right eye from my injury from like a year ago, and now I'm like a new man. So I was laid up. but I did get drugged to the Hinsdale Country Club, Mark, Sebastian.
Oh, fun.
So,
How'd you hit it?
And it's funny because when you go to that, it's like you see the same blonde woman in 15 different dresses. All
Can't
the wives
complain about that.
Yeah, all the wives out here kind of look alike. So there.
So are you saying
I live where Mark Sebastian grew up before everybody is like, what the hell are they talking about?
What the heck is he talking about? So would you say you're now like, let's say, a $6 million man? Do you think they've improved you? They've made you better, sir? You seem like a little bit more pep in your step.
Well, I can see.
That's
that'll help. It's helping a lot.
That'll help.
So
well, there you go, listeners. A new and improved once future and now present Dr. VSTOXX as we keep on rolling into a little bit of the old volatility review.
It's time to break down the latest developments in the volatility trading world. It's time for the Volatility Review.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Vol Review, the portion of the show where we break down what the heck is going on out there this week and indeed today from a vol trading and trending analysis and all sorts of fun perspectives out there. I like this comment from the queen in our chat. Markets are nuts. Yeah, they are. It's been a weird week. We're kind of used to this one color. I think a lot of our newer listeners, you may think markets only go up. A lot of green on the screen of late, and we are seeing some green on the screen again today. We'll get there in a second, but earlier this week, we saw a lot of interesting developments, including yesterday, one of the more interesting, bifurcations of the market I've seen in quite some time. We're talking a lot on this show about dispersion and some of the impact that's had. A lot of our guests coming on lately saying that trade already is super crowded. I think we saw some of the impact of that yesterday as just coming off of a surprisingly light CPI number. And what happened? We saw huge rotation out there. NASDAQ off nearly 2%, S&P off about 1%, and then small caps up about 3.5%. Just the absolute bonkers town, I think, is the technical term out there. And then coming into today now, we have kind of the other side of that coin. We had a surprisingly light CPI number. Today, a surprisingly robust PPI number, maybe showing us that maybe all is not behind us yet. Can't whistle past that inflation graveyard just yet. So yesterday we have a cool number. Markets mostly sell off. Today we have a surprisingly hot number. Markets are rallying again. Of course, we have some earnings thrown into the mix there as well. Citi, bunch of other big financials popping off today as well. So a lot of things to mix into that stew. All that a long way around to saying markets looking robust today. NASDAQ getting back a lot of what it lost yesterday, up about 1.1%. S&P up almost a full percent. Dow almost up a full percent as well. So getting back a lot of that goodness. And, just for fun, let's go out to our old friend small caps. Up 1.25%. So yesterday wasn't enough for them. They're adding on to that ridiculous. You almost have a year's worth of movement in 24 hours in the major index. So yeah, I think crazy town is the technical term out there, listeners. All of that baking into a VIX cash when we kicked off the show. Weirdly enough, almost literally unched from where we were. Again, we're going back 2 weeks now. No show last Friday, listeners. It was down about 1/10 of a point. We're at about 12.25 when we kicked off the show. So almost literally unched. If that was our crystal ball game, we'd be within our margin of victory there. VVIX up slightly at an 80. We were a 79 last week, or 2 weeks ago. So up a full point out there. So everything kind of treading water from where we were this time 2 weeks ago, which is kind of intriguing. Let's go around the horn. Let's start with you, Mr. Meatball, sir. Obviously, a pretty wild week. What was catching your eye on the vol front this week, sir?
Yeah, it's interesting. Leading into Wednesday, we had been talking about this crazy, the 8 versus the rest of the market. And then on Wednesday, it was kind of a rising tide lifts all ships. Everything rallied. Then on Thursday, we had the a partial unwind. We saw RSP up about, which is the equal weighted S&P. So, to make this simple, imagine you put $100 in all 500 stocks. That is equal weighted ownership of the S&P 500. Through Tuesday, over the last 3 months, that trade was down over 0.5%. It's now up approximately almost 3%. On Thursday, we saw that index rally hard while the NASDAQ was down over 2%, which pulled the S&P lower. Today, we're back to a rising tide lifts all ships. We have the NASDAQ up over 1%, the Russell up 1%. Russell had just a phenomenal Thursday. That was another area of money rotating into. The Dow up almost 1%, and the S&P up almost 1%. So this is another rising tide lifts all ships. Basically, everything is up right now, sans the banks, which were a little soft today, and Meta. So just kind of interesting trades across the board. Apple, they're pricing in something that Apple currently doesn't do, but hey, it's the most valuable company in the world again. And the VIX, which had been climbing all week, it looks like it wants to close below 12 today.
Getting that gravitational pull back down to earth, perhaps. Mr. Rhoads, same question for you, sir. What caught your eye in a very topsy-turvy week out there, sir?
Well, my namesake catching up with the rest of the market, it's still got an awful long ways to go. But that was definitely one thing that caught my eye. Another one, and we'll get to it when we talk about the European volatility, is VSTOXX did what you would expect it to do after all the election stuff got out of the way. And they were pleasantly surprised in France after being worried that the evil far right was going to take over. Where everybody else got together and shut them out. So the Macron, he gambled and he won with respect to a snap election. He was kind of crafty. My understanding is kind of crafty the way that he did it. He did it so quickly that the opposition barely had enough time to put people on the ballot. So, thank goodness we can't do that in the U.S. because could you imagine if they say, all right, we're going to have an election and the president may change in a couple of weeks? That'd
be fun.
Things would be nutty.
When he announced that, I thought that was political suicide. I was like, well, you just got roundly trounced. Now you're going to dive into another snap election right now? That would seem to be madness. And yet you're right. I guess they didn't have the infrastructure in place. He managed to pull out a bit of a surprise, eked out an existence for a continued existence, I should say, for his political life. So, yeah, a bit of a surprising maneuver that actually worked out. I thought that was the height of madness when I first heard him announcing that. Goes to show what we know about the European parliamentary systems out there and their snap elections. Looking at the chat here, we got Option God asking, can we talk about small cap vol today? Yeah, great minds think alike, Mr. God, because I was just about to get to that. Small caps, obviously the story out there this week. I mean, there's a lot of stories you can look at if you want, but it's kind of hard to ignore small caps. We've talked about the dispersion angle. We've talked about rotation in the past. If you want a deeper dive into what's been going on in small caps of late, go back to TWIFO from 2 weeks ago now, where we chatted with the folks from FTSE Russell there, deep dive into recon, all that kind of fun that's been going on. Small caps have definitely been the story out here. But if you've been listening to Vol Views for a long time, I know there's a lot of you hardcore long-time listeners out there. You remember back in the early days of this show, and we talked a lot. We were packed the only people on the planet, really. In fact, if you search for RVX to this day, our stuff is kind of the only stuff that comes up. Nobody else on the planet ever talked about that. But RVX was, of course, the small cap vol product. It actually traded for a while there, which was fun. We tried to get more attention, more interest in it, because at the end of the day, think about it, listeners, small caps structurally just more volatile than large caps. That's just the nature of the beast. So a vol product on that should be a no-brainer. And yet, for whatever reason, there's a million reasons why products fail in the modern ecosystem. They don't get a lot of support, all kinds of things that go on. Maybe the structure is a little weird. All sorts of things can happen out there. There's not a lot of liquidity providers that want to dive in first, so the markets are wide, but it's hard to attract volume if there's no liquidity, so it's that catch-22 that confronts all new products. A lot of things that happen behind the scenes about whether a product lives or dies. But RVX is one that I always thought had some teeth. I've been on SIBO for years. They should probably bring that one back. FTSE Russell, especially now. How fun would it be to have a small cap vol product now? But RVX, you'll be pleased to know, still exists. They are still disseminating. You can't go out and trade options on it anymore like we used to on this show back in the day, but fun stuff nonetheless. As you might expect, like everything else, it's been kind of drifting down like most of the vol products. It hit its high back earlier this year, 26.14 on February 20th. Its low was actually right about a month and change before everything really shot north in the market. It was September 14th of last year. So then, of course, as you might expect, it came roaring back to life just in the last 24 to 48 hours. It was at about a 1790 before all this madness started popping off a few sessions ago. Rallied up to almost 2140 today, hanging out right now, coming off a little bit, obviously. Hanging out right now, I just had it up. There it is, about 2060. So coming off about a third of a point again today. So as you might expect, people always conflate downside with vol. But if you're roaring 3.5% in any direction, that's vol at the end of the day, listeners. So RVX getting a shot in the arm while the rest of the vol index is kind of taking a bit of a break. Mr. Rhoads, I remember you were on the show back in those days when we were talking about all things RVX. So what are your thoughts on small cap vol this week, sir? And do you agree? You think it's time to bring back a tradable small cap vol product, sir?
Tradable small cap vol product. I honestly think I traded the first contract on that at SIBO. Even though I worked there, I could trade. I know I did the first trade in the gold volatility futures. To solidify what you were just saying, as far as volatility, RVX going up with the rally, you can off of Bloomberg, you can get 30-day at the money implied vol, 30-day 5% out of the money implied vol in both directions. Yesterday, or let's just go back to Wednesday. Wednesday, the 5% out of the money call implied vol was about 1% lower than the 5% out of the money put implied vol. Yesterday, that flipped to the out of the money calls being at a 6.25% premium relative to the 5% out of the money vol. Or to the at the money. Sorry, the at the money vol. I'm comparing them a little bit differently. So at the money vol. So yesterday, the out of money implied volatility, the 5% out of the money implied volatility rose to a premium relative to the at the money implied vol for the first time since June 12th. So you do see, and the big point there is one of the differences with RVX versus VIX. We have seen upside activity in the Russell 2000, dramatic upside activity like we saw this week, drive the overall implied volatility higher for the Russell 2000 as people do a little fear of missing out trades and buy some out of the money calls on the right.
Whole bunch of FOMO out there in small caps. Mr. Meatball, same question for you. You were obviously on the show back then as well. I believe you slung a few RVX contracts in your day. I think we all did. Those were fun times. Good vol living back then. What are your thoughts on the vol action we saw in small caps this week?
I mean, the Russell had been our once and future Dr. Vix's namesake had just been so bad for so long. It's not surprising to see it finally make a bust out. It's actually trading at 2-year highs right now, which sounds incredible until you realize how crappy the last 2 years have been for the Russell 2000. It literally had basically gone nowhere since August of 2022 until the last 2 days. So I do like the breakout. I'm interested to see whether this thing can get some legs to it and make a serious run at 2,200. The realized vol had gotten just ridiculously low. What's interesting is with this rally, we're actually seeing a little bit of an uptick in implied volatility off of this because there's finally some excitement in the Russell. You're seeing some call buyers there. Nothing insane, but if I'm bullish going forward, looks more like a setup for like a bull butterfly than a just straight call at this point. The time for straight calls was 2 days ago.
Yeah, definitely better than now out there. But intriguing stuff. Are you out there, listeners, looking at small caps? Would you trade a new small cap volatility product? Maybe that might be a fun flash poll for the show. Producers, take note. Would you trade if they brought back RVX, if they relisted a small cap Russell 2000 volatility product? Would you trade it? Very simple. Yes or no? Maybe we'll put that out to the masses producers and see what they have to say. I know we got a bunch of vol degenerates, so I'm guessing most of you will say yes, but I guess we'll find out as we keep on rolling out here to see what's going on the vol surface this week, listeners. And the answer is we're coming in a wee bit. Remember, we're going back a whole 2 weeks now, not just to last week. So we've seen the front portion of that curve come down a wee bit. Looking at the whole curve, really, trying to see where we topped out 2 weeks ago. Interestingly enough, we top out at a little bit higher level now than we did 2 weeks ago. We topped out at about an 1810 on the curve this time 2 weeks ago. And we get up to, if we go all the way out to next year, listeners, into March, we top out at about an 1845. So net on the front portion of the curve, we are lower, but the highest, the apex point of the curve is a wee bit higher this week, which again is kind of interesting. Everyone's fixated on October, obviously. Last couple of weeks, putting that into more stark relief. 2 weeks ago, we were at an 18 even on that October future coming into the start of the show. Today, we're at a 1745, so down a little over half a point out there. Then, of course, the front portion of the curve getting shellacked. August down almost a full point, about 0.95, and the July future down over a point, down about 1.12. on the last couple of weeks. So interesting evolutions out there on the vol surface. Mr. Meatball, we'll start with you, sir. Anything catching your eye out there on the vol surface this week?
Well, when you look at the VIX, it's now trading 1280. We're fast approaching AUG expiration on I believe we still have July expiration. What am I thinking? Yeah. July expiration in about 5 days. That spread is about normal. The August still looks a little bit cheap relative to September and where July is trading. And that kink in the election trade has what is that, about 40 cents now, Russell? That looks, I still think by December short, buy a mix of December or by November short to October is a nice trade, even with that spread
still coming down. But yeah,
I still like that.
Mr. Rhoads, same question for you, sir. While you're angling for some free swag in our live chat, what's catching your eye on the vol surface?
Big futures curve. Same thing as Mark. I'm honestly disappointed that October is only at a 40-cent premium to November now. I thought that we were going to have a chance to short October versus November. At some point this summer. I assume maybe the market, you know what? I guess the volatility market is just absolutely thrilled that Donald J. Trump is going to get elected in November. I'm totally kidding about that. But it is kind of surprising that the polls are showing. I think maybe it's the market's reacting to Biden is probably not going to be on the ticket, and that the Democrats will probably figure out a way to go ahead and beat Trump, whereas before it was a toss-up. That's the only reasoning that I can come up with for that, for the quick narrowing of that gap.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. You can maybe argue you're right. Maybe they're just spreading out the vol into other months as well, because it's kind of more of a moving target now than it was back a few weeks ago, and everyone was fixated on that one date. But yeah, a lot to unpack, and there's also a lot going on. We just kind of touched on it earlier, some of the surprises coming from the overseas elections. Let's get to that now, listeners. A little bit of the old international volatility review.
It's time to explore what's happening in the volatility market beyond our shores. It's time for the International Volatility Review. The International Volatility segment is brought to you by Eurex, home of VSTOXX, VSTOXX, DAX, and the German government bond-based Eurobund, Eurobobble, Euroshots derivatives. Eurex is the leading European derivatives exchange. Learn more about trading VSTOXX futures and options, the European volatility benchmark, at www.eurex.com/VSTOXX.
All right, everybody, welcome to the International Volatility Review, the portion of the show we break down all the action on the vol front beyond our shores, listeners, particularly looking at the Eurozone out there. And as we mentioned, a lot of action, a lot of surprising action over there. Of course, a couple of weeks ago, we saw a sharp spike, pun intended, out there in VSTOXX after those surprise results. A lot of the far-right parties getting some traction, maybe some surprise traction over there in the European election. So Macron really rolling the dice there, calling for some early elections, and seemed like it might blow up in his face, but apparently not. And looks like the vol market liking that result because we're seeing a lot of the juice that had been injected into that market coming back off the board again. On our last show 2 weeks ago, listeners, we were at an 1842, so looking very frothy. All of that is gone now. Coming into the start of the show today, we had VSTOXX closed at a 1306 coming into the start of the show. That puts it down almost 5.5 handles, 5.36 over the last 2 weeks. So they squeezed all of that juice back out. Remember, the 52-week low came in December of about 12.12. So we're less than a point away from that again after threatening a 20 handle not too long ago. So we've been saying it for a little while. VSTOXX, when it wants to move, it can move, and certainly exhibiting that over the last couple of weeks. Mr. Rhoads, I was surprised. Sounds like you were surprised as well by just A, the results of those elections, and B, the resulting response on the vol front. What's been catching your eye out there in VSTOXX over the past few weeks, sir?
Last Friday, the things had gotten pretty flat. The last Friday before the final election over this past weekend, or the final part of the French election over this past weekend, we had spot at about a 25-cent premium to the July contract, and the July contract was like around 14.50, I believe. Bear with me a second; I'm pulling up a bunch of things at once. Was around 14.15, and spot was around 14.5. So that was an indication right there that you felt like, or that the market was feeling like the volatility would come down post-election. When we were together 2 weeks ago, the July contract was around 16, even though the spot was up at 1840. So, the kind of curve that you expect when when we've got a known unknown on the horizon. Now we're in pretty much a normal shape with spot around just at 1306 and the July contract at 1330 that goes off the board on Wednesday. I do want to point out, if you want to trade the curve for the election in the U.S., the October contract is at a $1.10 premium, or a 1.1 point premium to the November contract as of today. So you can still, it's been showing the same shape over in Europe. I do think there are a couple of other potential volatility events between now and October, and that might have a little bit to do with that extra premium. But the European volatility curve has been acting very similar to the U.S. volatility curve, and I did see. I met with one of your listeners the other day when I was on Wednesday. I was downtown in Chicago, and he showed me a report for an over-the-counter volatility trade where one of the big banks is suggesting that you want to be long European volatility and short U.S. volatility in September, and the futures are reflecting that right now. But you could trade that outlook using VSTOXX and VIX. Unfortunately, it's actually it'd be kind of difficult to trade right now because that's being reflected in the pricing with September, with the VIX at basically 15 for September and VSTOXX at around 1550. If those two got in line with each other, might consider buying September VSTOXX and sell in September US VIX. Just based on, and I got to find out exactly what events they were talking about there. But that trade would make a bit of sense if you think that there's going to be some European specific volatility before we get to our election. But again, October's at 1745 and November's at 1635. And then finally, I did want to highlight a couple of VSTOXX option trades that got put on last Friday that we're most likely taking a look at a volatility crush after the weekend. And there was a buyer of the July 14 puts last Friday. They paid 60 cents for them. They did I think 6,000 of them, maybe. Yeah, 6,000 of them. They paid 60 cents for them. Based on spot VSTOXX, those are worth 94 cents right now. They're worth 70 cents based on where the VSTOXX future is. So pretty smart trade. And then another one that I kind of see what they were thinking here. It's a 1x2 using the July contracts. They bought 1,000 of the 18 calls and sold 2,000 of the 20 calls. And they were able to do this for a credit of 2.5 cents, a very small credit. But if VSTOXX had spiked up to around 20 or so, this trade would have been looking really good. The 52-week high on VSTOXX, I think, is around 21 or so. So as long as it didn't surpass its most recent 52-week high, that trade would have worked out kind of okay. It's working out for them now. It looks like it's still open. It's working out for them now because they put it on with a small credit that probably covered a bit of the commission and had a little bit of money left over. And these options are going to expire out of the money regarding unless we get some sort of over the weekend volatility event. So kind of a smart trade. If the end of the world had come about, they might not be feeling so good about it. So that's your European volatility look back, outlook, whatever. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby, indeed. Fascinating that it is shaping up very similar to what we're seeing on the VIX curve here on the U.S. front. So if you want to play that election maybe with a little bit different flavor, listeners, certainly an option for you folks out there. Speaking of options, listeners, let's get on into the big VIX mothership this week. Things were looking kind of sleepy to kick off the session today. In fact, coming in not that long before showtime, there wasn't really a heck of a lot of paper, like 300-something thousand. It wasn't like it was nothing, but it certainly wasn't a banger day. And yet, looks like something went up right as we pretty much started off the show, because all of a sudden we are popping up now, listeners. The volume right now, 723,000, so nearly doubling over the last roughly hour or so out there. The ADV could use a little shot in the arm. The ADV is down to 712. That's down 33,000 contracts. Again, not a surprise. We had a truncated week last week, though I think given some of the action we saw this week, we might start seeing that ADV move back up in the other direction. Again, it's mid-July. These are usually not banger times for the vol markets. Oh, speaking of banger times, really quickly, let me jump to this here. I think we had it in here. But yeah, just something interesting, just going off the futures from earlier, listeners. Volume on the VIX futures surprisingly up last month. Overall options volume down last month, almost 5%. VIX futures, though, continuing their upside move, 7.4% increase in volume. Again, VIX futures was kind of the dark spot in the markets for a long time. Even when options volume was exploding in the early days of the pandemic, VIX futures volume was anemic. And now all of a sudden, a lot of other things are down, including ETF options down 14%. Index options, again, the thing that's been carrying the market on its back, down over 9%. And yet in that environment, VIX futures still managing to claw an extra 7.4% year over year. So kind of just an interesting factoid to mull over. VIX futures and the vol futures market in general looking a little bit more robust these days. Is that translating over into some paper? Well, let's find out. What are the size positions that are open right now on the VIX options front? We are still 9-1 calls over puts in terms of the top 10 size positions. And it doesn't take you very long to find Waldo this week, listeners. He's right here at number 10. Spoiler alert, 209,000 of the AUG 15 puts. That is your one and only put friend on the list this week, listeners. I hope you're ready to strap in for some calls because we got some for you. Number 9, 216,000 of the SEP 25s. Number 8, 217,000 of the AUG 17. So, dare I say it, almost reasonable. Number 7, right back at it, 219,000 of the AUG 47 halves. If that's not doing it for you, allow me to present number 6, 222,000 of the D's 42 halves. So farther out and a little bit closer to the fire. Number 5, 274,000 of the July 15s. Dare I say it, perhaps the most reasonable trade on this board, unless you really love those AUG 15 puts. I wouldn't fault you for those either. Number 4, 274,000 of the AUG 25. So back to the upside. Number 3, 305,000 of the SEP 20s. Number 2, going back to July, we got 312,000 of the July 18s. And then dominating our list yet again this week, 432,000 of the July 20s out there. See any strikes you like? See any strikes that make you scratch your chin and say, I don't know. Let's see if we can find some more things that make you go, listeners, with a little bit of Russell's Weekly Rundown.
Now, Russell's Weekly Rundown. Now, Russell's Weekly Rundown.
And yes, listeners, in case you're wondering why we always play it twice, it is literally in Mr. Dr. VSTOXX's contract. He will hang up if we don't play his theme twice. He's that much of a prima donna. Mr. Dr. VSTOXX, are you sated with your theme this week?
I just love that when she was 10, she's 19 now, but the first time that I played that for my children, my 9-year-old daughter looked straight at me and said, I just really don't want to be associated with that.
She wasn't even a teenager yet.
She wasn't even a teenager yet. Teenager now, and doing wonderfully. There was very, very little weekly option activity. There was one day, I can't remember if it was Monday or Wednesday, where there were no trades using weeklies over 100 contracts, which is the what I screen above. So it's been a pretty quiet week for weeklies. The biggest economic number that we had was this week was today with the CPI, I guess, and didn't even see a lot of activity leading up to that. And I really had a heck of a time finding a trade that I liked. So, I like the trade that I'm going to say because it's the best of the worst trades that I saw. Somebody on Tuesday came in and sold 100 of the August 7th 13.5 puts and bought 100 of the August 7th 12.5 puts. They did it at a 42-cent credit. The index was I believe below 12.5 when they did it, and it just unless they've got some insight as to the next employment number is gonna make VIX spike or something along those lines. I question that one. The risk is controlled here. 58 cents. 58-cent loss if we go below 12.5, and we'll see if it's held to expiration. I did want to point out. Well, the trade that I hate. Somebody bought 200 of the VIX July 31st 100 calls for 3 cents each. And unless that trade was out of like Russia, I'm assuming that it's not going to work out.
Yes.
A hundo.
That's
I did want to point out, we talked 2 weeks ago when I was here about a weekly trade where they bought, I want to say the 13s or the 13.5s, and they paid a small premium for them. And it really, my assumption was they were going to hold it into expiration, and they did hold it into expiration. I got to look back real quick because I wrote it up a couple of weekends ago. Smart short trade. They paid 22 cents for the July 3rd 13 puts. They held them to expiration, and the settlement value of those options was 85 cents. So, and they did it 4,000 times. That's a great trade.
Not a bad do, as the kids out there say. Thank you, Mr. Rhoads out there, for doing yeoman's work, even though you do demand twice the theme action to do it out there. Speaking of action, we got some action on the tape out here this week, listeners, which is kind of refreshing after obviously last week being a little bit quiet. Friday, today, of course, 723,000 contracts on the tape already. So looking fairly robust. We're pretty much at the ADV already right now, a little bit above it. So it's a good sign heading into the weekend. The big dog today, 41, almost 42,000 of the July 13 half puts. These are going the way of the dodo next week. So intriguing. You like those, listeners? 13 half puts. And then right behind it, we have 38,000 of the SEP 20s out there. There we go. By the way, those July 13 half puts went up for $1.03. If you're wondering what price action did we see out there, $1.03. So you like those for $1.03, listeners? And number 3, 38,000 of the AUG 13 puts. Number 4, 35,000 of the SEP 35. So back to that SEP upside. And rounding out the top 5 today, we got 27,000 of the July 12 half puts. So a little bit of intriguing put action out here today, listeners. 12 half puts going up for 36 cents if you are so inclined. Again, those going out next week. So which of those you like better? 13 half puts for $1.03 or the 12 half puts going out for 36 cents? I'll leave that up to you. Yesterday, kind of the banger day of the week. Actually, I take it back. Monday has exceeded it. And obviously today, so far, no slouch either, so we could easily beat that today. But yesterday, exactly 900,000. You don't see that too often. Round numbers on the tape. The big dog, almost exactly 50,000 of the Feb 27 calls. Going out to Feb already. That's kind of interesting. I haven't seen a lot of Feb lighten up the tape. Looks like our friend doing the synthetic versus the upside was back. He did 50,000 of the Feb 27 calls versus the Feb 18 synthetic. I did an initial print 15,000 each of the Feb 18 calls and puts. I think he did a few more because they did more around 30,000, I think, total for the day. But yeah, interesting. We've seen that trade kind of going up a lot now, and apparently they are continuing it out to February now. So again, the big dog, the Feb 27s, followed by number 2, 43,000 of the AUG 12 puts. Number 3, 39,000 of the AUG 14 half calls. Number 4, 37,000 again of the AUG 14 half puts. And then rounding out the top 5, 34,000 of the July 27s. Intriguing. 27s dominating our tape yesterday. Not a strike I had in my playbook, but that's why you run the numbers, listeners. Wednesday, 719,000 was the total. The big dog, 71,000 of the July 12 puts, followed by 68,000 for number 2 of the July 13 calls. Number 3, 56,000 of the July 14 calls. So kind of all the strikes you might expect. Number 4, 43,000 of the AUG 14 half puts. And rounding out the top 5, 41,000 of the July 12 half puts. So intriguing stuff out there. By the way, the July 14 calls were indeed closing. So intriguing stuff out there. Tuesday, kind of the laggard of the week, only 462,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog, 22,000 of the July 12 puts, followed by number 2, 19,000 of the July 13 puts. Number 3, 17,000 of the AUG 25s. Number 4, 17,000 as well of the July 14s. And rounding out the top 5 on a pretty light day, 17,000 as well of the AUG 13 half puts. A Monday, another banger, 972,000 contracts to kick off the week, so threatening 1 million. The big dog, we had a SEP vertical, 100,000 pretty much of the SEP 25, 45. We talked about this on Monday. I'll have to go pull up on the option block, actually. I'll have to go pull up the price. I think they did it for around, I think it was around 30 odd cents. I'll pull it back up here, and we shall see, listeners. But yeah, they did the SEP 45s for 21 cents, the SEP 25s for 59 cents. So doing that whole spread for 38 cents. You like that, listeners? Are you a buyer of that? You sure as hell can't sell it. Do you want to buy it for 38 cents? I don't hate it. Of all the trades we've seen, it's not the most insane. Damning it with faint praise. Number 3, 37,000. So you fall off a cliff from 2 to 3. 37,000 for number 3 of the AUG 20s. Number 4, 34,000 of the AUG 42 halves. And rounding out the top 5, 30,000 of the AUG 14 half calls. All right, that's a lot of talking. Mr. Meatball, spell me for a bit. What caught your eye? You like this SEP vertical that went up on Monday? And what else caught your eye out there in the VIX options this week, sir?
It was a relatively muted week, I thought, for the VIX as a whole. When I'm looking at, the big trades, I don't know that I see anything up yet today. You do have some September going up. Looks like they're playing around in September calls. Biggest trade of the day is the 15 calls. That looks like kind of a mid-market. The 20s were sold. Looks like they bought the 17s. So you know what they did, Mark, is they did a roll. They sold the 15 calls and then bought twice as many of the 17 calls today. So that's 30,000 by about probably ends up being 60,000. That's the biggest trade of the today so far. Yesterday, we had a seller of the Feb 27s. Nice little overwrite. That was against futures. So that was just a straight vol play. So they did that tied up. So that was the 11th. On the 10th, that was the day. That was the other day we went parabolic. July 13s and 14s going up against some 12 puts. Nothing overly exciting there. Tuesday, I was still on vacation, so I didn't see too much, but pretty muted day on Tuesday. And Monday was September. They went after that 25-45 call spread again, Mark. They love that call spread out in September. Looks like that traded close to 100,000 times. I'm looking at least 70,000. I'm sure if I dig, I'll find a total of 100. Yep. Total of 100,000 of those trade. Nice little bull hedge there.
You like that bad boy for 38 cents, sir?
It's not terrible as a hedge.
Yeah, I don't hate it either. I don't know why.
No.
You can't sell it, that's for sure.
No.
But intriguing stuff out there. So you want a little fun flyer, listeners, maybe that's your huckleberry. As we keep on rolling out to the land, already coming up against it. Man, we've been having fun on the show today. Let's get out to some of the vol ETPs before we get into our VIX and VSTOXX guessing game. Listen, let's go out to SVIX. I know the meatball and my compatriot, Mr. Dr. VSTOXX, probably have smiles on their faces today. SVIX hitting yet another new all-time high. Can this thing do not but go up? Everyone talks NVIDIA, you know, the secret story of the last few years has kind of been SVIX. 5160 right now, up 3.4 points over the last 2 weeks. Is that, yeah, that is pretty much 51.59. That is pretty much the new all-time high right now as we speak. So if you thought a 50 handle was kind of outlandish in this thing, that wasn't that long ago. We were kind of laughing at the 30s, right? And now here we are, 51.60 pretty much. My goodness, that's some action out there. So yeah, all it takes is a little bit of vol reset, vol to go back up and then come right back down to kick SVIX north of a 50 handle. So if you're wondering how much upside can be left in this thing, well, apparently north of a 50 handle can be had out there, listeners. In terms of size positions, by the way, 6,000 contracts on the tape today. That's beating the ADV of 5,700, which is a good sign. Also, the ADV continuing to tick up about 500 contracts over the last 2 weeks. So again, it's not the euro dollar or anything like that, but it's certainly better than it was, let's say, a year or two ago. Top position right now in SVIX, 2,700 of the July 50 puts. That's interesting. Don't see a ton of puts out there. Some folks probably go dig into those. Some folks I've had to guess probably overwriting those, but we shall see. Mr. Rhoads, are you back in on the SVIX game? And what are your thoughts on this new all-time high, sir?
I am not. I've got out of the money puts expiring in 2 hours and 8 minutes, but no, I am not, unfortunately. So that, and I just, that's what I get for being a little bit too cute and not sticking with at least a little bit of it. But we need a volatility event to help me get back into that.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a little bit of a retreat on SVIX as well. To put it, Mr. Meatball, have you unleashed your SVIX strategy to the masses yet? And what are your thoughts on what we're seeing out there? New all-time high.
I have not, but I will be very, very, very soon.
And it looks like these July 50 puts, listeners, were opened back on July 3rd. So not that long ago for prices around $1.50 to like $1.65. Looks like paper was probably selling these, but I'll have to dig in a little more to see the opening. Actually, looks like they lifted the offer on some. So if they bought these bad boys, yeah, they kind of traded all over the place that day. But interesting. Buying 50 puts. That's an intriguing way to play a vol pop. Listen, I probably would go other ways, but intriguing nonetheless. UVIX, I don't know how intriguing UVIX is now at a 460 right now, down 0.8 of a point. 10,000 contracts on the tape today. The ADV is 16,000. going in the wrong direction, down 1,000. Mr. Meatball, I saw you put out something recently about how anemic UVIX vol is right now. Do you have a use case for UVIX at a sub 5 handle, sir? Or are you kind of just waiting for reverse split?
Not really. I'm waiting for it to do something. I'm waiting for that reverse split is what it comes down to. And until we get that, it's just kind of hard. It's hard to trade.
Yeah, it's. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I don't know how much you can do with it here, except for Mr. Rhoads' little weekend trick. Have you tried that again, Mr. Rhoads?
I am. Late on Fridays and you get out of it on Monday mornings. It seems to hold enough of its value that it doesn't cost you a whole lot. And if we have a weekend volatility event, then it pays off. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, unfortunately, but I have traded it 3 weeks in a row now, and it's been okay-ish. We'll leave it at that. I did a little bit better than getting out on the open a couple of weeks ago, like a dime better or so. So I got what I do when I do things like this is I'll trade them for a month or so, and then I'll look back and see if my trades matched up to what a little back test would tell us. And so far, it looks kind of good. But yes, I am doing that.
It's not the worst thing I've heard to go about and hedging some of the. Obviously, we've seen very literal weekend risk over the last few years, so it's not the worst way I've seen going about hedging that. And if you can scratch it at the very least, maybe make a few cents, then again, not the worst way to go about it. I think you're going to kick off a whole litany of people putting on some UVIX going into the weekend close now, Mr. Rhoads. So be careful what you have wrought out there. UVXY, a little bit more reasonable to trade right now than UVIX at a 20.5, down 2.6 points. 53,000 contracts on the tape, even though the ADV there going the wrong direction as well. 44,000, down about 4,000 there as well. And let's round out the ETPs. VXX at about a 10 even, down about 3/4 of a point. Looks like there were about 29,000 contracts on the tape earlier in the show. Let's see if any more. They jumped up to about 39,000 now. So close to the ADV, which is 45,000 contracts a day, down 5,000 from this time last week. The big dog position out there, 28,000 of the July expiring today, 10 have calls. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say those probably not going to work out unless we get some crazy vol action towards the end of the day. Looks like those all traded yesterday. Wow. It's like paper buying them for about 11 to 12 cents yesterday, 21,000 times. Wow. Buying one day upside in VXX. Not the use case we see a lot. Mr. Meatball, are you a fan of the 0-day upside trade in VXX? Seems like somebody is.
I mean, if you want to take a shot, I guess you can. I would rather use like UVXY.
Yeah,
or
I wouldn't go
UVIX,
VXX for that. Wow.
Hey, you have at it.
It is a trade you can do. I think that's about as much praise as we can give that one. Why do you go VXX for that one? Yeah, there's so many better underlyings to do. But we got to keep on rolling, listeners. It is time for the crystal ball.
It's time to peer into the future and reveal what the volatility gods hold in store. It's time to look into the crystal ball.
All right, everybody, let's do some business out here. Listen, remember last week, listeners, we were going out for 2 weeks, and that's a challenging thing. I will say, by the way, I think all of us got smoked on VSTOXX. I don't think any of us had these crazy levels here on VSTOXX. 1306, no 13 handles. I was at an 1862. I was way off. Meatball was at a 2002. No joy here for him, even farther off. VSTOXX 15.5 for Mr. Rhoads. And we were also joined by our buddy, Mr. Matt, on the show 2 weeks ago. He had a 19 for VSTOXX, so no joy for any of us. But I think we might have some joy, weirdly enough. Mr. Meatball, your palindromic nonsense finally coming home to roost, sir. I was at a 12 double on VIX. VIX right now about 12.25, listeners. Mr. Rhoads exactly a point north, 13.25. All of us surprisingly close, given that was a 2-week window. But Mr. Meatball, your palindromic nonsense coming in for the win at 12.21. You get the coveted Bullseye Award for this week. And I have to say, sir, for 2 weeks, even though I know it's complete palindromic nonsense and it's completely out of your hands, I will still tip my cap to you, sir. Well done.
Thank you. The palindromic nonsense is maybe palindromic sense is what I would say.
How long have you been sitting on that one? All right, so you get the pride of place. You want to go first? You want to pick somebody else to go first, Mr. Winner?
Let's let you go first, and
All
then
right.
Russell, then me.
All right, I shall go first, listeners. We got a fun week ahead of us, 12.25, like we said, in VIX. VSTOXX and VIX actually closing that gap again. Only a little, about 0.8 away or so, 13.06 in VSTOXX. So I was way off in VSTOXX last week, so why don't I start in VSTOXX land just for fun? I think we saw a lot of the juice get squeezed. I don't see a lot of catalysts to drive a lot more juice. And then again, it's an open question how much domestic in the U.S. earnings season impacts VSTOXX. My cursory analysis says not a lot. So I'm going to say VSTOXX probably not going to be getting a lot of juice to the upside. So I'm going to say VSTOXX this time next week. I'm going to say 12.65. And then, of course, I might have to go lower than if I'm like, no, I'm not, because I'm going to take VIX down a little bit as well. I'm going to say it. I've been hesitant to say it of late, listeners, but I am going to do it. I am going to say, I'm going to say 11.78 for VIX Cat. I said an 11 handle. You know what that means, listeners. If I say it, it's going to get sparked into fruition. I probably should have some puts in my back pocket before I say that, but alas, this week I do not. All right, 11.78 for VIX, 12.65 for VSTOXX. Mr. Dr. VIX, I'll let you go next, sir. We'll let the winner go last.
13.65 on VSTOXX. But they get their CPI numbers next week. So we'll see if maybe we'll see what inflation looks like over in Europe. And in the U.S., we got nothing but earnings. And earnings really doesn't have much of an impact on VIX traditionally. I haven't checked the banks that reported quite yet. So I don't really know. It looks like JP Morgan's down a little bit. That's the one that I thought might actually rebound. I don't think earnings are going to have anything to do with anything. You said 11.78.
I did.
I'll do 12.50.
12.50, and you said 13.65 in VSTOXX. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I said 13.65.
All right, Mr. Meatball, the table is set for you, sir. Where are you going to go this week?
All right, so I've got 12.50, right? And what did you guess, Mark?
11.78.
All right. Well, this is a tight market. All right, I'm going to have to go higher. I'm going to go 13.31 for the VIX, and I'm going to go with a whopping 16.61 for VSTOXX.
What the hell's happening in Europe next week? I'm intrigued to find out.
I think some craziness. Just be aware.
Just be aware. Be aware. A palindromic upside coming for us all in VSTOXX. So there's your market for this week, or I should say next week, listeners. I was at the dark side in VIX, 11.78. Mr. Rhoads in the middle at 12.5. The Meatball on the upside at 30. He's feeling more vol across the board here. And then VSTOXX, I was at 12.65, so I was the low man on the totem pole this week. Mr. Rhoads a point ahead of me at 13.65, and Mr. Meatball feeling his oats at 16.61. All right. That music is going to do it for us on the show this week. Hope you're having a good end to your trading week. I know a lot of you listen to this on the weekends after the trading week is done, so I hope you had a good trading week overall. And for everyone listening way down the road, we just love you all equally out there. Hope you're having a good trading day, week, wherever and whenever you're listening to this. And Mr. Rhoads, we'll start with you, sir. If folks want to check out all of your VSTOXX analysis or anything else, where should they go? What should they do?
Substack. It's just russellrhoads.substack.com. I'm not a marketing genius. So that's where you can find me. My full name on Twitter is usually where I'll put up anything that I do. Just before this, I did a webcast with Interactive Brokers where I talked about a study that we did at the Kelley School of Business on block option trades and the that paper's coming out Monday or Tuesday. So if you'd like a copy of it, feel free to send me an email or DM me on Twitter or whatever, and we will get that out to you. I am going to talk a bit about that study, and as I mentioned, I just did a webcast on it. One of the reasons I do a webcast on the papers before I publish the paper is to get some feedback, and I got a busy weekend ahead of me based on some of the feedback that I got. But the follow-up presentation is one of the things that I'm going to talk about at Mark Sebastian's deal in a couple of weeks in Chicago.
I'm intrigued. I'll have to check out that paper, sir. So send me a copy when it's ready. Maybe we'll do a special hit on it. If you're not done talking about it, maybe we'll do a special hit on it on the network so folks can sink their teeth into it. Kind of fun. I know a lot of our pro folks, at least, will be. Everyone will be excited to hear that. In the meantime, give them a follow, listeners. At Russell Rhoads, 2 S's, 2 L's, RHOADS, all one word for all that goodness. And Mr. Meatball, where should they go for a little bit of meatball goodness, sir?
Just follow me on Twitter at OptionPit. You will be a happy camper.
You will be a happy camper indeed. Get your diploma from the ivy-covered halls of Option Pit U, listeners. And maybe if you're going to be around in Chi-Town in a couple of weeks, come check out myself and the Meatball and the Rock Lobster and Mr. Dr. VSTOXX and maybe Uncle Mike, a whole bunch of people showing up for the Option Pit Partay extravaganza over there. In the meantime, you can see all that, optionpit.com. Give them a follow on Twitter at OptionPit. All one word. And you know where to go to learn more about all things VSTOXX, listeners. A couple of places you can go. UVX.com, probably the easiest holding pattern for all that stuff, including Mr. Rhoads' research and everything. EUREX.com, the place to go. Just go to stocks.com as well, STOXX.com, if you want to just go straight to the VSTOXX fun. Speaking of fun, that's going to do it for us on the network this week. If you're hanging out in the pro, don't worry. I'll be back in a little bit with the Rock Lobster to break down all of the weird, wild, and perhaps shady paper going up out there on the options front. That's on Options Oddities. If you're saying, what the hell is that? Head on over to theoptionsinsider.com/pro. That's the place to go to get access to that. Get our pro podcast feed. Get you all of our shows. I've lost track of how many episodes are up there now for you. A lot. As well as, of course, you could join us live for that show and everything else. Giveaways, all sorts of fun. TheOptionsInsider.com/pro is the place to go. We got to get on out of here. Back again in a little bit for Options Oddities for all you pro folks. Back again on Monday, of course, kicking things off with the option block all the way through to next Friday. Another episode of Volatility Views. Stay safe out there, everybody.
The International Volatility segment is brought to you by Eurex, home of Euro stocks, VSTOXX, DAX, and the German government bond-based Eurobund, Eurobobble, Euroshots derivatives. Eurex is the leading European derivatives exchange. Learn more about trading VSTOXX futures and options, the European Volatility Benchmark, at www.eurex.com/VSTOXX. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.